Yeah, I feel like school's like yesterday.
Yeah.
I miss it so much. Yeah, I think my senior year was very fun, crazy, and stressful all in one because I mean, you have that creation of your portfolio, and that's you basically about to like jet set into the real world. And that's also kind of becomes your baby. It's gonna be everything that you've worked so hard to do and learn. And you kind of also get to look back at the projects that you worked on your freshman year and you can see how far you've grown, which for me was super humbling because I remember my first class at Pacific, I like didn't know how to do a lot of stuff on Illustrator. And I remember Brett like sitting with me for hours teaching me stuff. And then by the time my senior year came, I just like was so much more confident in my abilities, and this portfolio is you showing that. And I think for me, my portfolio, I was okay with showing things that weren't as strong because I think it allows the person that you're talking to and the interviewer to see just your progress and where you've come from. Um, and also, I took it upon myself to take past projects, which one was on my site, the Eye to Eye project. I ended up redoing that completely for a packaging interview that I had for an internship. So I think if you're able to take all your projects, look at them, pan them out, you can see what your strengths are. And usually you want to put those first because you'll know how to talk about those more. And then it's always good to have that project that you did and then you looked back on and you knew ways to make it better, because that's a really strong talking point because it shows that you're able to point out your own mistakes and point out ways that you can be better yourself as a designer, but also how you took that and grew from it, which was hard because no designer wants to say that their work was shitty, but like you have to say it at some point. And yeah, that portfolio was probably super stressful, but at the end of the day, it's going to be so worth it. I keep mine in a box under my bed, wrapped up in like a bajillion boxes so it doesn't get destroyed. um, and then I don't know, I guess with school too, you guys are, I think Brett said that you guys are about to do the Do Good project and you just got done with the Metaphor project.
Yes.
Yeah, so those were the two projects that I personally was like between putting into my senior show. Um, I think the excitement of those projects were you are a senior, you know a lot more, and you kind of get to take those projects into your own hands. It's not as much sugarcoating things. It's you're gonna make it the best that you're gonna make it. And for me, I knew that one of these projects was going to be my senior showpiece. So I wanted to be able to showcase how I thought, how I was as a designer. And for me, I'm very 360. I don't like to just focus on making something pretty. I like to think of the marketing aspects, how it's going to trickle down into different mediums, different platforms. Like for me, my senior showpiece ended up being a campaign that I created for Lush. And I recreated that to show what it would look like in a window display. And so for me, what started out as something that was just simple packaging, do good, it was also part of the Metaphor project. It transitioned into names and how they looked on the bottle and how they were set up in the store and how they would be set up online and what the customer experience would be like. And I think for me, that showcased me super well. And every designer is going to be different. And every designer in the show is different of how they showcased who they were. And so I think at the end of the day, that's what you need to realize also going into every project is how does this show me as a designer, but also how is it going to help me grow as one at the same time? And finding that happy medium between the two is always a fun little puzzle piece. And I think that's just how you kind of have to go into your portfolio, your senior show, the last few projects that you're going to have. Uh,
When you showed your portfolio, what do you remember any of the kind of reactions you got? Like
yeah.
both, yeah, yeah. What
Yeah.
like what
So
what?
it was actually pretty funny because when I was in the middle of making my portfolio, it wasn't complete yet, but I had my second interview for Disney. And so I remember showing up and being like, this is nowhere near complete, but if you have feedback for it, I'd super appreciate it. So kind of being able to do like a test run of my portfolio was really cool because I had interviewed with them previously like the previous semester. So they kind of knew a little bit about me, and kind of just showing them some of my projects and like how I was going to start the flow of my portfolio. And then kind of at the end, it was a nice takeaway to be like, does this flow work? What do you think? And so they were definitely, I had pieces up at the front that for them, they didn't care to see because it didn't pertain to the internship that I was applying for and interviewing for, because it was more for packaging. And I had things from ASUOP of events and stuff like that. And that doesn't necessarily pertain to the packaging role that I was looking at Disney. So definitely being able to have a portfolio that can change, because there's been many times where I like go into an interview and I wish there was something different at the front of my portfolio than there was, but it's harder to change out my portfolio. So definitely think about that, because you're not going to interview for the same types of positions unless you're super niche already, which you shouldn't be super young starting out. And so I remember them talking about the flow, and then I remember them saying they wish for them, they don't need to sit there and read, because for Disney, I was very much, I was flipping through it. So for them, they wanted it to be more visual than textual. So as I was talking about it, but then when I interviewed at Kendo for the packaging position, they took the portfolio from me and they were flipping through it. So you also kind of have to think about that too, of how you're presenting your portfolio. It's so much different to like go like this and like try to present it as if you're reading them like a bedtime story versus them flipping through it, because also when they flip through it, they're going at their own pace, not your pace. So you have to like think, if they're just continuously flipping, they're just like looking, and then they might close it and say, okay, like tell me things. So then you don't have your book to go off of. Because that happened. I interviewed with 6 people at Kendo, so every single one of them handled my portfolio differently, which was super stressful. There was some where I could actually show it to them, and then my last one was with the VP, and she just kind of like flipped through it really fast and then closed it and then just wanted to talk to me. So you also have to prepare yourself to not have the portfolio as a crutch. And those are just different things you have to think about. It's going to be hard to have this ever evolving portfolio that just works for everybody. It kind of, you have to simplify it down and think what's going to be the best presentation of my stuff, but also that I can kind of tweak depending the role that I'm talking about or who I'm interviewing with. So that was really, really big for me. And from
Sorry, Joe.
yeah,
This is extremely helpful, I think. Portfolio is such a monster
yeah,
unknown.
it is such a monster project.
And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember you saying, because you had 2 interviews with Disney, and after and so going back for the second one, and then she didn't mention that she got down to like, I think it was 2 people, but then they were dragging their feet and you had another possibility.
No, yeah, I actually was supposed to have I got the internship, but the girl went on vacation. And while she was on vacation, they stole her internship position from her, which means I didn't get it anymore.
Yeah, I couldn't remember that detail.
So, yeah.
But really the point or the question I wanted to ask you was it either for that second Disney interview or for a different one where you realized, well, I need to create another version of what they do that I currently don't have. I didn't do that. I think it was packaging that you
Yeah, that
didn't.
was for the
Yeah, go ahead.
That was actually for the first Disney interview, which I didn't even show up with a portfolio because it was my first time interviewing in like a legit stressful big company internship. So I showed up. I kick myself for this, but it worked for me because I showed up without a portfolio, nothing to show them of my work except for actual tangible pieces. And that was a packaging role, and we'd never really done packaging as a project. So we were actually in the middle of doing the marketing. I don't know if they did the marketing project with Marie. And you like worked with the marketing class and you kind of created a project for them. So luckily my project for that was packaging. So I ended up bringing that with me, and then also bringing the Lush packaging with me. So I showed up with just these 2 little things and just talked to them about it. And they were like, oh, like, do you not have a portfolio? And I was like, no. But I guess one takeaway from that is they liked my personality enough that they invited me for the interview the next time the position was going through. And so it kind of just shows sometimes your personality can be really, really strong. So also, like, really be yourself and be authentic, because for them, they said my personality is what brought me to the second interview. They're like, normally if somebody who was unprepared like that, it would be whatever. So also keep that in mind.
And
And
then
then,
didn't you make something on your own to
yeah,
address what was missing? Because it
yeah,
wasn't an assignment, it wasn't, but you invented the project for yourself, right?
yeah. So I remember during that first interview at Disney, they had said they're going to be super big on 3D mockups and showing, like, being able to mood board, present, and show your ideas without having to tangibly craft it out, or have it sent to production, and like for them to show them the real thing. Like, they want to be able to say, like, hey, in 2 hours, get me a mock-up of what you're thinking for this. It needs to be 3D, it needs to look realistic. And I'd never mocked up packaging before. I had no idea how to do that. So every Saturday at the art building, I went in and just practiced mocking up. I practiced on the computer. I took my eye to eye project and I completely redid it so that my mock-ups would look stronger. So I spent a lot of time learning 3D rendering and how to perfect that, and how to not only just make it super quick, but also how to do it by hand in case there was a custom package, because you can get 3D mockups everywhere. But if you're going to do something customized that's not a standard silhouette, you need to be able to know how to do that. And so I created all of that stuff on my own and had that in my portfolio to show them the next time I interviewed with them. And that was something that they pointed out. They were like, I remember you telling us you didn't know how to do that, but looking at it now, it looks super realistic. So they're gonna notice things if you interview with people twice, but know who you're interviewing with and what they're looking for, and make sure that's in your portfolio. And if it's not, I would literally say teach yourself, because that's what I did.
Mhm.
So.
And then when you went, like you mentioned that the Disney one was an internship at first.
Mhm.
What other internships did you have? And
I
how did you get them?
I had an internship with The League, which was a dating app based out of San Francisco. That one I applied for on LinkedIn. I literally applied to like 200, 300 internships, and I only heard back from 3. So those are going to be the numbers that you hear back from with anything. Um, and for most internships and most design jobs, I've found them to be structured pretty similar, where you kind of have that basic HR interview of just introducing yourself. And that's when you sell yourself as a person and who you are, your work style. And I call those just like the preliminary ones, because it's basic information. And then usually you'll either have a design challenge or you'll meet with the designer, and those vice versa. But
What do you mean by a design challenge?
they're so stressful. So I think with every position I've ever interviewed for, internship or real job, they give you a design challenge, which you basically complete between 24 hours and a week, depending on what their timeline is. And so for the internship, I had to complete an infographic for like their demographics or something. And I had to do it in 24 hours and send it back to them. And that was where I had to basically look at all their color schemes. Like, I had to do my own self-research on the brand, because this is where you prove that you know the brand and you're able to design for them, and that you also understand what it is like they're selling, they're doing, their voice. So it's all these things. And then when I was interviewing for Kendo, I had to recreate 2 packages. So like, I went to Sephora, I did research, like I looked at the packaging, looked at what it looked like on the shelf, looked at narrative voice, all of that stuff, and redesigned it and how I think it could have went better. And then for my position now, I had to do a design challenge of creating one item and showing how it could be transitioned into every digital aspect for our website, social media, email campaign, so that she can see that I can transition between mediums and I understand what that looks like, and sizing and colors. And if something's vertical here, like how does it work horizontal there? You're basically being tested on just basic design knowledge, but you're also showing that you can do it for that company. And then from there, you usually have an interview with the designer and you talk about the design challenge that you did. And then that's where they kind of get more in the nitty gritty of what's your design style? How do you do design approach? Like when you're working on something that you just can't figure out, how do you handle it? What your design process is, like what's your strengths, your weaknesses. It's a very, I think design interviews are way different than really any other interview because you're really talking about yourself, but also how you work with others, and your design in general. So yeah, there's always a design challenge. So be very ready for that.
I do want to get to what you're doing now a lot, but I'd want to see first, does anybody have a question about school? You know, like any projects that she did at school that you might be doing. She touched on that a little bit. Internships, I would count in there with school, you know, and she touched on that a little bit. Um, does anybody have a question there in that school related area? Are you sure?
I
There
have
we
a quick question. When you were searching for internships while at school, like what was your process that you'd go through when searching for them?
LinkedIn is your best friend. For me, it was just scouring tons of internship positions and figuring out also where I would go because obviously for me, I'm from North Carolina and I was going to school in Stockton, and there's obviously not design internships in Stockton, and there's none in my small hometown back home. So I had to think about the cities that I was okay with going to, and ones that I knew would set me up to really build the career that I wanted for myself. So I narrowed it down to like the big cities: SF, New York, LA. And then I also just allowed myself to open it up anywhere. I remember I interviewed for somewhere in Portland, which I don't even know if I'd ever really go to Portland, but hey, it's an interview, it's practice. Um, so for me, it was narrowing it down to city, not internship, because you don't want to be picky because any experience is experience. Because I don't work in app-based stuff, I don't do UX UI, but that internship showed me a lot of things, and it just gets my foot in the door to also learn how to work cross-functionally and be on a team. And also, I loved LinkedIn, but it can get really broad if you don't specify things. So usually I do it based off location, and then I just type in things like just design, and I literally, I'm not even kidding, if it said design in the description, I applied to it. Like it didn't even matter if I didn't even think I was qualified, I was applying. Like the one that I had in Portland that I interviewed with was for an architectural design, and I've never taken architecture, but I still got an interview. So I mean, literally, just apply. That's all I can like say for that specifically, and then know the cities that you would want to look into.
I think that's a really interesting observation. So this idea of this point of it's practice.
It is.
So how do you practice interviewing? Well, the only way to really do it is do interviews.
Mhm.
You know, you will have a mock interview with Marie and myself, and typically we invite at least one, if not two, other designers to join us in that mock interview. But still, you know us, so
Mhm.
it's not a full example, although you were nervous.
But
And no doubt there's nerves with all of it, and that's a part. But this point of finding ways to practice it, it just means jump in there and do it.
mhm.
And the other suggestion, and then we'll go on to something else, is that AIGA will have a portfolio review in the springtime, and there's a couple juniors that I've invited to join. They are here with us now too. And you can participate in that AIGA portfolio review as juniors or seniors. I would encourage all of you to participate in it. And you can also participate in it like Joe did on one of her first interviews, without a full portfolio. So you take whatever you have and you get feedback, and you're practicing this weird animal of interviewing, where you're talking about yourself, your interest in design, your goals as a designer, that kind of stuff. So any other question related to school? Come on.
I never asked questions either, so it's okay.
This is Emily, what kind of question do you have?
I guess my question would be, what projects, so I know you talked about this a little bit, but what do you wish that you would have had more experience with during undergrad that you could have brought to interviews or jobs? Like, what do you feel like your portfolio was lacking? And like I said, I know you talked about that, but any other things that you could add?
Yeah, I think for me, because I knew I wanted to do roles that were more 360 and not just so design heavy, is I wish I had things that dove more into digital and as well as marketing, because those are two very big like design realms that are coming up. And I think something to really set myself apart would have been really nice to have digital marketing and digital design in there, because it is such a big thing now and it's such a transition that we're going into. Because I mean, I can look at LinkedIn right now and a lot of the roles are digital design that's out there, and just understanding how to design for a platform, how to do like UX, UI design, understanding that, because it's a lot of things that I'm learning in my role now that I wish I had a grasp of beforehand, just not just making something pretty, but understanding who is interacting with it. And that's also something that I touched with at Kendo too, is because we were designing beauty for people and we had to understand how to sell it. And so I think that marketing aspect of design, I wish I had more of. I wish when I was going into packaging, I wish I had a lot more packaging, but I don't want to be in packaging anymore. So I think I have a fair share of packaging now, but I think also when you're young in your career, it's really good to have as much diversity as you can. And so for me, looking back, I wish I wouldn't have stuck with my safety colors, because a lot of my stuff is pink. Because it's just what I always fall back on, and it's always what I was including in stuff. And so I think for me, I wish I would have got out of my comfort zone a little bit more and made sure I had projects in there that weren't what I liked to do, but it was things that were going to be strong for me in the end and were going to push my comfort zone. And then that's something that going back, I wish I did, but also just really thinking about the digital market design aspect rather than so heavy like design. I think that's something, digital platform stuff.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, well, you're going to have a chance to ask other questions here too. I just wanted, while we were still talking mostly about school related things, I wanted to pause a little bit there. So, so what happened to you after you graduated? I mean, we've gotten to a couple interviews and you've mentioned a few of those places. I know that some of them were very positive and some of them, maybe they had some hiccups in there. So how did you deal with that, and how did you move from one place to another, and some of that?
Yeah, I've moved around a lot, which has been fun. So for me, after graduation was really stressful, because being from the East Coast, I didn't want to go back there. And I knew if I was going to stay in California, I'd need a job that would keep me here. And I had interviewed around. I had a really horrible interviewing experience in San Francisco when I was graduating, where they just sat there and watched me fail, which very humbling. And you also kind of learn in your interviews too, the type of environment that you're going to work in. So keep that in mind as well. But I had these two ideas of either going into packaging, because the idea of something tangible with consumers was really exciting, because I was so close to having the Disney packaging internship that I just wanted to keep doing packaging. And then I loved events because I got to do that at ASUOP, and like experiential things was very intriguing to me. And so I just didn't know what route I wanted to take, but I didn't have enough packaging experience to go straight into a role for packaging. So I ended up interviewing with a company in LA that did events for female empowerment, which was a little different, very niche, very specific. And I ended up getting the role and moving to LA. It was only a contract role for 3 months until either they would offer me full time or they would kick me to the curb. And that was really interesting. I was in a very, very small team. We were only a team of 14. There was a lead designer, so I got to work under her and then work alongside a social media girl. And I like made a lot of templates for her. But that role was interesting because you go from school where you kind of make your own hours and then you're thrown into the 9 to 5 and you're like, how does my brain, well, at least for me, I was a night owl. So I would do all of my studying from 9 p.m. to like 5 a.m. in the art building. And so like to switch that to 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. was very hard. And you have to kind of just be on as soon as the workday starts. There's no getting into this creative flow. So a lot of transition came into that role, which looking back, I hated, but it was kind of nice because it was a very chill role. For me, it was not challenging enough for me because Brett did a great job at challenging me all the time. And then to kind of go into a role that was very cut and paste, I literally would take copy from a copywriter and literally copy and paste it into a poster that was already designed and called it designed. So it wasn't the job that they had told me it was going to be. So I think looking back, really interview the people that are interviewing you, because that's your chance to learn about the role before accepting it and stepping into it and then realizing it's not what you thought it was going to be. But it was really cool because we got to work on some big, cool projects. We got to do a lot of design for big events in Switzerland and France and the Cannes Film Festival and Ad Week in New York. So it was really cool to see that stuff be put into action. It just, for me, it wasn't challenging enough. And then towards the end of my 3 months, I ended up getting an interview at Kendo in San Francisco. And within 2 weeks, I got the job offer and had to move and start within a week. So super quick transition. And for me, my thought process was, because I'm young and I'm not married, I don't have kids, like there's nothing holding me down, I just went for it. And I think that's a really big, it's a terrifying mindset, but it's also been really good for me because I've been able to learn a lot. I've just been able to go with it. And, you know, I'm going to get an experience either way. So started with Kendo last August. And that was insane because I went from a company of 14 to a company that had 7 offices around the world. And our SF office was the headquarters with 600 people in it. So to go from small startup where you like joked around the office to corporate, you sat at a cubicle, very different. So that's like another thing that I had to step back and be like, I never really thought of what this meant to work corporate America. So you also kind of have to think about that too, as the environment that you like to be in. And I will say, sitting at a cubicle as a creative really is gray. It's interesting. I think going from the art building that we are so ingrained into loving and having it be such a creative space to corporate America, it's very different, and you kind of have to create your own creative zone. And that experience was very hard because I took a packaging role, which I'd always wanted to go into and try, without any packaging experience. So for me, it was the biggest learning experience that I had been through, because it was like, now I'm working on dye lines and printing and print process. And I really only had that one print production class with Shauna.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And that was it. So all of my information was based off this class that I had for 4 months, twice a week, versus people who had been in packaging for 20 years there.
Mm-hmm.
But that was also the job where I had a very crazy manager And that's like something you also have to think about when you're going into a role, is who you're working for. So for me, I was on the packaging team specifically, and it was me, the junior, and then we had 4 seniors and a director. And so one of those seniors was my manager. So I was his only direct report. He was in charge of everything. So instead of just me going free whim, creating whatever I wanted, I only created based off of what he told me I was allowed to. So that was a very different mindset, is that you're creating for somebody else and you're not creating for yourself. And that's something that you kind of have to take into every role, because you're also creating for a consumer. So it's, again, that's not for you, which is like a really harsh reality, because we all as designers like to make our own thing and we want it to be our way, and you can't do that. It's Disney, and I just felt like I needed to like bring my A game, do as much as I could. So I had my portfolio with me, as well as the tangible objects. And on top of that, I had it, like, because I asked how many people I was interviewing with. So for the second interview that I had with them, I was with 6 people. So I printed out 6 resumes. I printed out mini portfolios of my portfolio, so that they had just like something foldable, and I could just be like, this is what I'm talking about. But that's a takeaway for you to look at my stuff later on when you're like reviewing candidates. It's a mini thing that they can look at. And so I had that to give to them. And then when I went and interviewed at Kendo, I actually made a, like, it wasn't a pamphlet, it was just like a front and back of the design challenge that they had me to do and why I did what I did. It was just a simple front back that I printed out and gave to them, and they all took it with them, and I gave my resume with them as well. And so you just really have to think of those little extra things that are going to differentiate you from somebody. And then also, because I was interviewing for packaging roles, my like little thank you was actually like packaging that I had made, and it was super tailored to my brand, because mine was all centered around coffee. So I actually had an espresso bar in there, and it was just like, thanks, like just a way to espresso my thanks. And I was like super punny with it. But I remember my director at Kendo saying she loved the fact that I was interviewing for packaging and my thank you was packaging. So think about that as well, as could your takeaway also be tailored for them? I always say be as extra as possible. I feel like it's done me very well in the past. So I'd say that's like, really think about that for your interviews, like how extra and how tailored can I do it for them? So that's really big.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think that this whole idea of tailoring it to who you're speaking with is extremely important, in as many ways, shapes, and forms as you can customize what you want to show and present. As many ways as you can customize the delivery of those things to who you're talking to, the better. Mm-hmm. No one's are. There's no 2 people are coming to an interview with the same backgrounds. And so it's about how you, again, I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Joe said at the beginning, is how do you be genuine about yourself, be you, and present your strengths. And you haven't said this yet, but you're interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. You know, it's kind of like, don't be a victim. Going in,
I think for me, every interview that I've had, I've grown strong with the questions that I asked them, just because of my past experiences. Based off of my time at Kendo, I ask so hard what the manager experience is like, how feedback is given, what's growth like, how do I gain independence in the role, how is tasks delegated to me. Like you don't think, like when I was first starting out, I didn't think about that stuff. I was like, oh my God, nothing's going to change. Like, I'm just going to get projects and do them. No. You're working with a bigger team. You're working with older people. Like my manager had been a global creative lead for Avon for 20 years before he came to Kendo. So the experience that he had versus me just walking in the door for the first time, you're working with people who know their stuff, and there's going to be some cutthroat atmospheres that you're going to kind of be thrown into, and it's just knowing what you work well with, that's the questions that you need to ask them. The biggest question that I always ask is what's day-to-day like, and how is feedback given? Because obviously you get your feedback from your peers and from Brett all the time. When I was at Kendo, I didn't get one lick of feedback, no matter how many questions I asked, no matter when I was like, hey, I know you showed my project in this meeting that I couldn't go to. What did they say? And they would just tell me it didn't matter. So if feedback is really important to you, you're going to want to ask how they do feedback, because I never got feedback. And so that was really frustrating.
So I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that, of how you work with other people. What are the roles of the other people that you work with? Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah. So when I was at Kendo, I worked with a lot of seniors, which is really intimidating as a junior, because you feel like you can't ask questions, but that's also because I'm shy. And for me, that was interesting because you got to be around a lot of talent, and you can't let yourself get intimidated by it because they were in your shoes one day. But also you work with a lot of personalities, and being able to kind of chameleon yourself to those different personalities is going to be really big, which starting out, I didn't know how to do, because I was like, everybody needs to like me. And then if they didn't like me, I didn't understand why. And for me, working cross-functionally and taking advantage of that too, because that's how you also build connections. So for me, I got really close with the people that I worked with, the other designers, but also like I took it upon myself to go say hi to the digital designers, because I knew one day that I wanted to go into digital design. And so understanding what they did for the company was really big. And also the people who I knew I worked directly with, like sourcing and other people in packaging, I made a note to always say hi to them, be friendly with them, get to know what their roles were like, because at the end of the day, you're setting yourself up for the career. You can't put your career in the hands of a manager or a director, because at the end of the day, it's up to you. So for like the first 6 months, I put my career in the hands of my director and my manager and let them dictate everything that I did. And then towards the end of my time, I was like, no, it's time for me to have my own voice. And so that's when I started talking to other people in the company, understanding different roles. And that kind of helped me 360 more, where I got to learn, oh, I made this packaging, and then this is how social is going to show it on social media. And like, this is how it's going to be viewed on the website. So take advantage of the people that you work with, because more likely they're going to be super willing to just talk to you about stuff. I don't think I've ever been told no to sitting down and having coffee and asking somebody about their role. And that's super big, because you learn so much that way. But yeah, it's also fun to work with.
Yeah, have you ever like done any type of freelance work? And if you did, how is that different from like what you're doing now?
Freelance work terrifies me because I love structure and I like safety nets. So for me, when I lost my job at Kendo, everybody was like, just do freelance. And that terrified me, just because I felt like I feel like in my career, I'm not ready and strong enough to do freelance, just because I don't know enough about it. But I do stuff on the side for a friend of mine for his marketing company, and make a few things for him, which is a little bit more tame. And it's interesting because it's less pressurizing. Like, you don't have to wake up sometimes every day and just focus on that day in and day out. I have thought of freelance just as like outside of my full-time role, just to keep me creatively diverse. But I don't have experience to say that I've done a ton of freelance roles. I've done contract roles for 3 months at a time. My role that am in now, I was a freelancer for the first month, which quickly transitioned into a full-time role. So for me, I just like stability. So freelance just scares me.
I think that question points out, well, there's kind of three major ways that you could go out following graduation. You could freelance and do contract work. You could, if that appeals to you, you could go that direction and you want to find out more answers to that particular question. On the other hand, you could be working for a specific company and designing various deliverables for that company, and that's more what Joe has done. And then the third thing would be is that you would work for a full service or specialty service design or advertising firm. So those would be the three main ways. They're not the only ways, but those are the three main ways that you would look that designers typically find themselves. So and again, Joe's, like she said, has had some contract experience, but the majority of her experience has been working for a company designing for them.
Yeah, which is very different.
Yeah. So yeah, so it is different. Anyone else have a question? Crystal.
Yeah, I have another interview question. So, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but like, how would you go around an interview if you don't have like enough or a variety of things to show for like the position that you're applying for? Like, if you don't have like let's say like packaging, like if you don't have enough things to show for packaging.
Yeah, so I remember when I was interviewing for Disney, I had nothing. I had the start of a packaging project, and I was like, you know what? This is what I have, and this is what I'm going to show. And for me, I know that sometimes my strength isn't always my work. And I know my strength is like my tenacity, my work experience, not my work experience, my drive, and just my personality as a whole. There's been people I've talked to that have gone into interviews that have had no experience in what they did. I'm one of them. I have no digital design experience like this, and I still got the role. So a lot of times your personality will sell itself, but I would say you need to at least have something that could correlate to what you're doing. Cause I mean, when I interviewed at Kendo, I didn't have a ton of packaging. Granted, I would be working on packaging day in and day out, but I had projects that showed growth. I had projects that showed illustration, which is going to be on packaging, typography, which is on packaging. And so you might not have that full specific project, but you have the little elements that show that you can make that project. So I remember them telling me I had a project that had really good typography, which was similar to one of the brands. And so it's just taking what you have and showcasing, hey, like I know this brand is like super strong in typography. This is a project that I did that was really type-based. And I understand like kerning, letting, and like structuring it on like layout and everything, and that's going to sell that you understand the concept. So it's not necessarily having that 100% here's a package, it's here's all the elements that I know I could put into a package. So if you don't have that, like an array of that, show the strengths that will get you to that array.
Yeah, I think we at the very beginning, one of us or both of us said something about trying to customize your portfolio to who you're going to talk to. Well, in the beginning, you don't have that huge amount of work to be able to have only packaging examples. And if you're going to interview for a packaging job, or you don't have, that applies to every single area, right? And to be honest, there's going to be a limited number of undergraduates from any school that would be able to do that. So you're not alone. What will set you apart is you showing what you do have, which is your best stuff only your best stuff, and relating the strengths of that best stuff to who you're speaking with. That's the customizing part. So Joe just mentioned several of those things, like typography. Typography is arguably a part of every design kind of thing that you would do in some way, shape, or form. So if you show a good typography in your design work, whether it's a package or not, but you can then say that the way the hierarchy is treated here, or why you chose these typefaces, or any of those things, those same decisions have to be made regardless of whether you are creating it for a website or for an app or for a package. So you make those things clear. You initiate that. You know, and that's the important thing. Now, is it going to be better if you actually have the thing that they create? Certainly, but you know, we're not going to have that right off the bat. Nobody is. So it's how you, it's kind of how do you make the best of what you do have, and by that I mean relate it to what they do. So that means you have to know what they do, and you do have to then know what those connections conceptually, what those are. Gavin, did you have another one?
Yeah, I got one more question. So how did you figure out or like determine that which job was the job that you wanted when you like first started?
Like when I first graduated, or so I was still waiting to hear back from Disney for the internship, and then I had gotten the offer from the Female Quotient. I definitely didn't come out of college with multiple job offers, and I had to sit there and pick which one I wanted because I was that awesome. That's, I think for design, that's not super realistic. It's when you're first out of school, you have and looking back, you have so much to learn. You have so much that you need to dabble into before you really get to that point where you're wanted, not you're really just wanting a job. But I've just been lucky enough on my journey that the jobs that I've taken have just boosted me to get to that next level and to know what it is that I'm looking for. And I can start to get a little bit pickier. I don't think right out of school you have that luxury of being like, I'm going to wait till it comes to me. It's, I'm going to take this job and it's going to teach me something. And then from there, I'm going to go to the next level. From there, I'm going to go to the next level. So that was how I approached jobs, but what I wanted to go into, I had no idea because I loved so many different aspects about design. And I loved the idea of packaging, never done it. I loved doing something with experiential design and just seeing consumers engage with my product and like what I spent months making. And then it was like, but I also liked just doing simple layouts and magazines. And it was just like, oh my God, now the world is my oyster. There's so many different directions. How do I choose? And for me, it was just the offer that I got, I took it. And then as I was in it, I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so it's been trial and error for me. I'm just realizing every job I've had is something completely different. I did experience, I did packaging, and now I'm digital. So every experience I've had, I've learned to figure out maybe, in 5 years, I want to just be doing this. So I think right out the gate, take the time to get as much knowledge about all different roles as you can, because even though I'm not doing packaging right now, that architectural layout of typography is like so ingrained in my head that when I'm doing stuff for social media and stuff like that, I think about that. Or when I'm doing like content shoots, I'm thinking about like how they set up content shoots with packaging. And it's like, I might not be in that role anymore, but you're going to take what you learn everywhere with you. So be open to just being a sponge. Your first like 2 or 3 years it's going to be like the biggest thing.